and why don't you kick us off?
Kathy Austin here.
Corey Harlan here.
John Fisher here.
Elisa Chang here.
Dale Van Valkenburg, present. Jeff Baker here.
Elisa Heim.
And then while Kurt gets his seat, Keena.
Keena Chadwick here.
Here.
And Kurt is here. All right, we'll move on to some of the other folks who join us for these meetings. So Counselor Perkins.
Counselor Perkins is gonna be a little bit late. She's in agenda review.
Thank you. Okay, we've got either Katie or Sarah with Ben Chamber.
Not online.
Sharon Smith.
Sharon will also be out for today's meeting.
Rachel Colton, Ben Parks and Rec.
I'm online. Good to see you guys.
Rachel and Whitney Hale, Deschutes County.
Whitney's here. Yeah.
And how about Lynn Middlestein with the Deschutes Library District?
Right here.
Hi there. And Eric Lint, Cascade East Transit.
I'm filling out for Eric Lint, who's on paternity leave, Andrea Bro, Cascades East Transit.
Great, welcome. All right, well, that concludes roll call. We will move on to disclosure of conflicts of interest. And Kurt, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, the reason why I was a little late is the conflict of interest. I believe Dogwood has applied for one of the business grants, and so I'm not gonna be able to take part in that deliberation. I'm gonna step out while we do that, or at least sit in the crowd.
Thanks.
Kathy Austin, I don't have any conflicts.
Corey Harlan, no conflicts.
John Fisher, potential conflict of interest. My employer has acted as consultant to one of the applicants. So I'll recuse myself for one of the agenda items.
Elisa Chang, no conflicts.
Dale Van Valkenburg, my employer, Brooks Resources, or TV Bend, actually owns 100 Northwest Hawthorne and 181 Northwest Franklin. I don't believe there's any actual conflicts of interest.
Jeff Baker, no conflicts.
Elisa Heim, I own a bookstore, Big Story Bookstore on Greenwood and Third. So there will be a conflict of interest today. Do I need to say exactly what that is?
Yeah, Colima Market applied for the business assistance program, which is directly adjacent to Big Story Books, and per our business assistance policy, anyone that has a financial interest, them or their family member, or is directly adjacent to the business has to recuse themselves of the business assistance deliberations today. Yeah, thanks.
And then Keena.
Yep, Keena Chadwick, no conflicts.
All right, thank you, everybody. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. So these got sent out a bit late, so there's copies here if anyone needs to review them now. Does anyone need a copy?
Great. Just the non-voting members may also need to declare
Excuse me.
conflicts too.
Yeah. So we'll go, why don't we start with Rachel
I have no conflicts to declare.
and Whitney?
I'll be abstaining from discussion on agenda item 3. The county owns property that's directly adjacent to one of the applicants. And I have a kiddo in childcare with another of the applicants. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Lynn
Yeah, no conflicts.
and Andrea?
No conflicts.
All right, I think that's everyone.
Great. Thanks.
All right. So it didn't sound like anyone needed to review the minutes here in hard copy. I need a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I'll move to approve.
All right, and a second?
A second.
Great. And all those in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Now it's Kathy with the motion and Kurt with the second.
All right, great. Well, we are to our next agenda item, which is the Business Assistance Program application review and preliminary funding recommendations. And so Allie and Jonathan are going to walk us through that. We have about 65 minutes for this agenda item today.
Cool. I'm just pulling up the presentation slides. Give me a second.
Do people with conflicts have to not?
Yeah, so folks who have conflicts, if you can just sit in the audience for this agenda item, that would be great. Thanks.
Survive.
I know. You've been voted off the island.
You could check. So I'm gonna give, sorry, everyone, I'm gonna hide you all on our screen over here so we can see the slides. I'm gonna give a quick overview of all the applications that we received. And then we did ask all the CAB members to score those applications per our business assistant scoring policy. I didn't actually give an overview of that, but we score based on kind of 4 criteria and have different rankings for those. And we did kind of get all those scores from both voting, and then 1 non-voting member did participate in that, but most of the scores that I'll show are just going to be the voting members. And then kind of go over some different funding options that we've put together as staff that are fairly consistent with the way that you all scored. I will just say in general, the scoring was pretty consistent amongst members. There wasn't like a huge outlier amongst like 1 member or 2 members. It was generally pretty similar scoring across the board, and even similar funding allocations across the board. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It wasn't exactly unanimous, but it was very close. So just something to kind of keep in mind. And then we can also, if you don't like either of the staff options that are presented, we have the ability to kind of pull up Excel and tweak that live. So just kind of going over the applications that we did receive. So we received 7 applications. We actually received 8 applications, but in the time that 1 applicant applied, they actually closed their business in the core area. So that was kind of a bummer. Juice Easy in Campfire had initially applied, but rescinded their application. So of these applications, all actually applied for construction assistance, but after having coordination and talks with the Riverside Animal Hospital, we switched their application to design assistance because they just weren't at a level with their application to really apply for that construction assistance grant. Those that did apply for construction assistance, we required them to submit a project budget that was based on like real contractor bids. So you would have seen those in the applications, and that led to sort of a max grant award based on that project budget. So whether they were, if they were applying for above 25,000, they needed to provide a 25 or a 50% match. If they were applying between 10,000 to 25,000, a 25% match, and then under 10,000 or less, a 0% match. So that kind of led to these max grant awards that we would consider for these businesses. We have exactly $100,000 to allocate for this program, but we received $169-ish thousand in requests. So we do need to make a decision today to kind of reduce that amount that we're willing to award by about $69,000. All of the projects are located in the core TIF area. Those are confirmed, as you can see on the map. And we did also try to remove any expenses from the eligible project budget that weren't eligible for the program based on our program criteria. Yep.
So are those totals after those expenses have been taken out?
Yes. Yeah. So for the design assistance program, the only application we received is Riverside Animal Hospital. They're really proposing to improve employee parking and landscaping on a vacant portion of their lot at the corner of Wall Street and Olney Avenue. This is a pretty visible location. I think everyone in town has probably driven by it. Just something to keep in mind as we're considering potential awards is that because the design assistance program is meant for the city to actually hire a contractor to help them do that design concept work, we have to budget this one as $7,500. So some of you kind of indicated that you'd only be willing to offer this this business like $5,000 for design assistance, but it's kind of like 0 or 7,500 where we need to be able to hire a firm to do some conceptual design concepts and develop a cost estimate for future improvements. 16321 Northeast 2nd Street. So this is kind of in the northern portion, I think just outside the Bend Central District. It has 4 businesses inside the building, and the building owner is actually the applicant. They're proposing a project to improve ADA access, signage, and lighting on the building. I think their cost estimate also included painting, exterior painting of the building, and even some roofing repairs that they found. The total project budget that they submitted is about 23,000, which leaves their eligible request at 17,253. This is also a BIPOC-owned business that coordinated with our Latino, our Latino-led outreach to kind of apply for the program. Open Space Event Studios, Central District Investments. This project is really applying for just the architectural and engineering phase of this project. So it doesn't include actual construction improvements towards the ultimate desire for this project. But this would be kind of the architectural and engineering services to plan for a change of use of the existing and former mechanic shop at 204 Northeast Lafayette Avenue, which is directly adjacent to existing Open Space Event Studios. The applicant is the same owner as Open Space Event Studios. So they're applying for, primarily to kind of focus some of those improvements on their frontage and infrastructure improvements, but this is really for the architectural and engineering services to prepare for an application to do that change of use. Their detailed project budget, again, just for those architectural and engineering services is 82,500, which means their max grant award is 42,250. Growing Tree Children's Center. So this is a childcare facility in the core area. They are planning to do some electrical service upgrades to support some ventilator transformations that they want to make to meet outside air requirements in childcare centers. So they submitted a total budget for that project of 36,500, but they only requested 18,250. Per our requirements, we could offer them up to 27,375, but again, they only asked for 18,250. Colima Market is applying for signage, exterior lighting, exterior paint, entryway improvements, and then even a new exterior delivery door and lock. They lease this space. We did confirm that they have a lease with options to renew. So their current lease expires in 2026 and has always had a 3-year option for renewal. They've actually done that 3 times. So they initially started this lease in 2017. Their total project budget that they submitted was 32,850. When they did submit that project budget, I noticed that it didn't include the exterior delivery door improvements. And so I clarified they were another business that was coordinating with our Latinx outreach coordinator to apply for this program. And I did clarify that the contractor kind of, overestimated and felt like he could include those delivery door improvements into that overall bid. And I didn't make them revise the estimate because of that, but just something to note. Their request is about 25,000. Because of that project budget, the max grant award that we could offer is 24,637. Dogwood Cocktail Cabin is planning to move into the former Spoken Moto building that was relocated to the Bend Central District on Hawthorne and 2nd. They are planning to do a variety of tenant improvements to build out that space to serve their needs. They have a letter of intent for that property with a initial lease term of 5 years with 2 5-year options to renew the lease. Their grant request is 50,000. They submitted, that detailed project budget number is not correct. They submitted a project budget for like 168,000 of eligible expenses. I think their initial project budget was like 262. I'd have to go back and look at the application, but we kind of reduced some of the costs that weren't eligible for the program. So their max grant award is 50,000. Sorry for that error on the slide. And then last application, Timber Kitties Preschool. So this preschool has already done some improvements to this building that they're hoping to get some reimbursement for. And then they are also planning to do some signage improvements to the site and are still needing to get state licensing to operate this childcare facility. That they also, some of those are eligible and included in the project budget. So they submitted a detailed project budget for about 14,365 and are requesting 10,000. They also have a lease on this property with an option to renew for a 1 to 3 year term. Any questions on the applications before we go forward? Nope. Oh, Kathy.
Oh, just a clarification. I think we had, I had a concern regarding the ADA access for the 12631 Northeast Second Street. And I was wondering if there had been any follow-up on that the painting costs might need to go towards the ramp. So just.
Yeah, so Kathy had emailed me separately about this application, concerned that some of the budget that was submitted for concrete improvements didn't seem that they were high enough to support the actual ADA improvements for this project. And I did follow up with the applicant to try to clarify that question. They're out sick this week, and so I haven't heard back from them, but that's something that we could kind of condition the award, we could kind of condition the award on and get more information from them before moving forward with an allocation, if that was a concern of CAB.
So, in the email, because they specifically.
Jonathan,
Hey,
come up.
Jonathan, come on up.
Because they had specifically stated an ADA improvement, we are now technically kind of forced to help them make that improvement if we're giving city funds. So that's what I said into the email. It would be staff's recommendation to work with the applicant to see if we could come up with a feasible, it's just ADA compliance, reasonable timeframe for a business is being pretty heavily enforced across the country. And I've had direct experience in both in Oregon and Colorado. So since they specifically put that in their application, it would be a recommendation that we'd follow up with them to help them make that improvement.
On that, since their budget included other things, could we fund just the ADA part of it?
Yes.
But we don't know how much that is.
Well,
currently.
in the email, usually concrete linear foot's about $250. So, I mean, there's leeway given the match grant that you could technically get.
I think what I would recommend is you have you grant them the award and you prioritize the ADA improvements first, right? So if there was additional funding, they could cover some of the other expenses, but the ADA would need to be the first thing that is eligible for reimbursement.
Yeah.
Other questions from folks?
Kina has their hand raised.
Kina?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a question. Are you able to foresee the increase in budget that's needed for the ADA, or do you think that'll still fall within their request?
We don't have enough information to determine that today, Kina. So I think that, they have to apply and request with the information that we have today, and we can always follow up with them based on the award, based on a recommended award.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Other questions from folks? All right.
Okay, so I'm going to get into the scoring results. So you'll see the applicant on the left, the voting member ranking. So all of you and Kina were the voters for this. And so basically Colima Market scored the highest amongst everybody. And I also on the side, I have with non-voting members. So those are pretty consistent except for 2 flip-flopped. So I'll go over that, but Colima Market scored the highest, followed by 12631 Northeast 2nd Street, then Open Space Event Studios, followed by Dogwood, followed by Growing Tree, Timber Kitties, Riverside Animal Hospital. When we added the one non-voting member, the only thing that switched was Timber Kitties kind of went up to where Dogwood was, and Dogwood went down to where Timber Kitties was. But generally, everything was pretty consistent, especially amongst voting CAB members. So with that, we also asked CAB to input kind of how they would distribute $100,000 amongst these different applicants. Yes. So we kind of had an average recommended award for each of the individual projects. You'll see that if we were to award at this amount for all of them, we'd exceed our project budget by about $8,000. So that's where the funding options on the next slide comes into play. But you can see that Colima Market receives 100% of their max funding award. 1631 Northeast Second Street receives about 71%, 56, 52, 59, 66, 60% of kind of what they're eligible to receive. So this is kind of the two funding options that staff put together in advance of the meeting. Funding option A is you're really funding some of all. And the kind of caveat with Riverside Animal Hospital is you kind of either have to decide to fund that design assistance program at that 7,500 or not fund it at all. And so option B is where you do not fund Riverside Animal Hospital because it scored the lowest of all the applicants. And funding option B essentially just you're able to fund more of the projects at a higher extent. So I don't know if there's kind of initial reactions on this. It might take a little bit to settle in. And we can also pull up Excel if we want to maneuver some of these numbers. But what I did try to do is make kind of the percentage of their funding allocation compared to their eligible max request consistent with the scoring so that it went down.
Ally, does option A exceed the 100,000 budget?
No, both of these equal exactly 100,000.
Oh, great.
I did do that in the math correctly. Yeah.
Well, do folks want a minute to mull over, or are there comments, observations, questions that are coming up for folks?
I have a comment. I have a comment. It's very interesting to me that we all sort of agreed on the same sort of schedule, and I'm pleased actually with both of these. I had thought that Riverside Animal Hospital wasn't really at the highest priority, even though I know it's a very visible location. I felt that some of the other items were of a higher priority for me personally. So I would be leaning more towards B and not funding Riverside Animal Hospital at this time. But I just want to put that out there. I'm happy to agree with either, but that's kind of where I'm leaning. So I thought I'd just start the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. Other folks?
In the scoring criteria, like Riverside had an NA during the near term impact because it's the design assistance, like, so that automatically makes the scoring for it much lower, right?
We multiplied their score by 1.25 so that you were comparing apples to apples.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Question?
Is Riverside Animal Hospital here? We had a discussion about this just for parity of all applicants, since not all applicants could be here today. Anyway, the chair and I had kind of decided not to allow that, but if you want to make a change or exception, we can do that.
Yeah, I think the rationale there was that, there's 7 different, applications here, and obviously we don't have full representation. And so if we were going to have an opportunity for everyone to kind of offer comment, we'd want to sort of have that set and be able to invite each applicant in, just to kind of keep that playing field pretty even. So of course, public comment is welcome today. We're holding public comment till the end of the meeting. So that'll be about like 4:40 today. So of course, public comments are welcome, but I think if we're specifically going to, have additional statements or conversations with these pool of applicants, I think where this group decided is that we wanted that to be inclusive of everyone who applied. So.
I will just add one thing that I didn't mention in the presentation regarding Riverside is the city does have a capital improvement program planned on Olney Avenue. And if the applicant was kind of able to provide more information about the ultimate intent of how to use the site, there might be synergy when the city does the grading in that area. So that's just one kind of more like near term potential for why to potentially prioritize that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Dale, you had a comment, and then Jen. And Keena, I can't see here if your hand is up, so Allie, please just let me know. But let's go to Dale and then Jeff.
I find it encouraging that we're all pretty much on the same page. My approach to it was funding Riverside 100% since it's all or nothing, and Colima 100%, and then everybody else at 50%, which gets you to about the same thing right at 100. But I have no problem with going with option A that kind of ranks them how everybody. But I had them, they were pretty much all the same other than Colima.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I like option A. And just to, on the Riverside piece for me, existing business in the area, like I want to support that, right? Like I get it. And I think the difference of, I let's say 7,500 and taking that away from the others, like that's minimal to each one in my mind to assist another business. The only thing is I graded it. I put more emphasis on the childcare, just for community impact, not necessarily cab, but just there was a like we all know housing and childcare, all the things. So that's only the other 2 cents, but I'm in favor of option A as we dialogue this initially.
Okay, thank you. Kina or Lisa?
Why is there a star next to growing tree?
I had an old caveat there, but the slide changed, so you can ignore that star.
I am inclined towards funding option A. I initially didn't love Riverside's proposal because it's like just very car centric and just improving a parking lot, but I don't know that we can get that detailed in our deliberations of what people.
I actually had that same conversation with the applicant when I talked to them on the phone. I said, I just want you to know the goal of this area is to be very walkable. And so I don't know how a car, parking lot will be perceived. And they emphasized that they are really committed to enhancing the landscaping, particularly on that corner by the intersection. So just wanted to reiterate those comments from the applicant.
Okay, because that would help me a lot in being more for option A, especially because this is design assistance. I would imagine that whoever designs it would also have landscaping in mind and not just have it be like just a parking lot. And then the other ones are pretty even with how I do actually kind of agree with Jeff that I wish that childcare was higher, but I think in my scoring that I did rank it pretty much like this. So.
Thank you.
Can I amend my previous?
Hey,
comment?
please, yeah.
Well,
And then we'll go to Kina. Yeah, go ahead.
your comment that there is some synergy there as to the street improvements makes me change my mind on that to go to A, because I think that would be a great opportunity if the city is in fact improving only to have that design work with that process rather than they come in and then later something else happens. I mean, to do it at the same time makes a lot of sense to me. With Jeff, I had actually ranked the 2 child cares a little bit higher, but I'm comfortable with the proposal on A.
Okay, thank you. Kina, how about you?
Yeah, I'm for option A, and I think Riverside also scored the lowest for me. And I think in mixing up some of the numbers, I was thinking about it's woman owned. It's actually it's a pretty I think it's actually really hard to get in there. So it's a known great business that's needed. And then the other piece was, across the street, you've got a couple hotels there, and then you also have Pioneer Park. So when I think about like tourists and that continuation, if those improvements were made, that would definitely flow with what we're trying to get at. So yeah.
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
With what we were saying earlier about the business on 2nd Street and needing ADA improvements, like, are you saying that the city would have to contribute money, whether we like give them money or not for ADA improvement? Like, do they need as much money then from CAB if they're already going to have to get money for the city for
They won't get money from
Oh.
the city for just ADA improvements. They would just, they would have, if they admit to having ADA barriers, they would have to address those ADA
Ah,
barriers.
It's a building
first.
code issue, through accessibility, Americans with Disabilities Act requirement that they address that. And so just wanted to make sure that the applicant understood that. Because if you start improving your property, you kind of have to bring it up to code. And that's a major impediment. Plus the tenants had mentioned that that was an impediment for them. So.
I had just some questions for this group that came up for me and I don't know the answer, but I think I'm also inclined to A, but I think my pause there is sort of like that analogy of spreading the peanut butter too thin, right? And so by trying to sort of make the easy call here where you get a piece and you get a piece and you get a piece and everybody gets a piece, that we, aren't sort of maximizing impact by sort of meeting the full need for some of these projects. So I'm okay, and I think I'm comfortable landing in A since this is our first round and our first rodeo, and I feel like that I'd be comfortable with that, but that is a question that comes up for me of just kind of that reality, right? Where it's just, we're trying to spread, we had far more requests than we have funding for. And so that's just a question I have for this group. Like, does that concern come up for anyone else? And it's fine if it doesn't, but that's just a question in my mind about A. And Jeff and Lisa.
I had the same dialogue, and I think that from the first box, which is this catalytic.
Mhm.
Aside from ownership
Mhm.
of the businesses, I didn't see a lot of these as necessarily being in my business, in who I work for. There's catalytic, and then there's like, oh my gosh, right? Like
Right.
big projects are going to change everything, and I didn't feel like there was, by my definition, a lot of catalytic type of thing in this. And that's where I landed on like a piece to everybody, because I didn't see the one where I'm like, push all the chips in, that's the one, right? But that's how I viewed it. But I say that with the caveat of, I did feel strongly about the childcare as Cadillac community, maybe not necessarily for this area.
Thanks.
I also have that concern about spreading it too thin, but one of the things that I notice about these two options, option A and option B, is that the percentages that every business is getting, aside from Riverside, is almost the same for everybody except for Second Street. Like, but 32 versus 35% and 37 versus 40%, those are pretty the same. So I kind of feel like option B, the only thing that it does is adds money to Second Street, this building at Second Street. That's a consideration that I'm still just thinking about.
Okay.
And then one of the things that I thought about the most when I was going through the applications was the box that was, can you do this improvement if like
like the need.
Yeah. So a lot of them said that they still could do it, even without cab help. They just would prefer to use the money for something else if they could. So that to me weighs heavily. And I think the only one that I can remember off the top of my head specifically that said that they could still do it without cab's money was open space. There was another one too, but I don't remember. It might have been Dogwood, yeah.
Okay. Were any other kind of comments and questions? I have one other question that came up for me, and it was, so I agree. I have the childcare ones for me are important, right? That's a business type that we've identified of having a particularly high need in our community and the core area in the BCD. The question that came up for me around Timber Kitties was that this to me read as sort of like a business that is kind of like in balance, right? And so that half of their slots were full, another half remained to be filled. And so my question there, was just if in fact this money is granted, right? Like, is this a business that, in it for the long haul, right? Like, can they sustain, right? And so that's probably maybe a little bit outside of our purview, but like since this is our first round, and it's not kind of explicit in our criteria of just kind of like, what do we do when it's a very worthy business? And yet I don't know like how stable the footing is, right? Of like this business continuing on. for a good long while, right? And so that was just a question again for me around that application that ultimately I scored it lower because I had questions around that. And again, I don't know the right answer, and that's why I kind of wanted to kick it to this group of like, did that come up for you? What do you think? Maybe particularly for you, Jeff, right? Because you're in this space a lot. Like, how do we reconcile, some of that as we continue to roll this program out? So that was another one for me.
I guess since you directed that at me, I purposely ignored it.
Okay.
Because I am in that space, finance and evaluation. I think, I mean, my general tendency as a business lender, like that's always going to be, right? Like, what is the money going for? Is the sustainability for the business? And I should say that I also sit on the neighbor impact, grant committee for childcare. So I want to make sure that's out there too. But for me, if we go down those rabbit holes, then we're doing a whole different type of evaluation. And I think the general purpose of this funds and grants, right? Like we're talking about like $3,500 or $10,000, right? And so I think for me, I purposely stopped at a line and said, okay, here are my 4 categories and questions. This is how I'm going to score it. And I'm going to have belief that we are improving this area based on the dollars, irregardless of whether they do or don't. And if, for me, $3,500 on that particular business, if they go out in a year, it's still a year of childcare for kids. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Dale, you have something?
I just agree. I mean, there's no business viability as one of our categories.
Right.
So, I mean, I think we're really kind of limited to this. And so that's why, for me, even though I know we have a huge need for childcare, I don't know how it exactly fits into our 4 scoring categories. Is it a catalytic? Like, well, it's not necessarily in the way I think we're thinking about it. So, but I'm still supportive of option A.
Great. Okay. Any other discussion?
I will
questions,
just
comments,
add for Timber Kitties in the memo, staff recommends that we prioritize the funding for the state licensing to be met prior to allowing other reimbursement expenditures to be submitted to kind of ensure that the childcare provider is operating before we reimburse other expenses.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate having a little space for that discussion. Thanks for the input, y'all. Okay, well, are there other comments, questions, folks, things you want to pose to the group? Are we ready to move towards a motion and a vote?
Corey, I just wanted to add that, like, I know it's not one of our criteria, but one thing I thought about too in this scoring, which maybe have been was a fault, but the job opportunities that would be created by these businesses, or the job opportunities that would continue. So I'm not sure if that's something that we want to just have in our back pockets as we continue to evaluate different applications, but I'm curious if other folks had that thought too.
In my mind, that's part of the catalytic aspect of it for me. But I agree, that's great that you brought that specifically up, but yeah, I think it's an important thing. But in my mind, it was already in there under the catalytic, so I don't know if we need an extra category for that, but it's a good point.
No, yeah, that makes sense, and maybe maybe I bucketed in catalytic too. Thank you.
What we can do is send out a survey to all the CAB members that participated to get feedback on how to improve the program next year. I definitely have a lot of lessons learned, and I think the goal is to improve the program moving forward. So we can kind of send out like a survey to you all to give more of that input of what you felt like was missing from this application review period, or what you'd like seen different in the scoring in future programs.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my questions, was just what are the key lessons and observations we learned from this first round? And so I don't know if we're ready to have that discussion today, but it seems like if we are able to get to a vote more quickly, if we don't need the full hour, then I, would be interested in hearing some of your observations about how we continue to refine and improve. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead. I'm good. That said what I need to say.
As I've been thinking about it more and with the weighted criteria of what we were all talking about and about not spreading the money too thinly and the need component, I would say that I'm fine still with option A, but I would actually knock down open space and dogwoods amounts just a little bit so that it could give more to Second Street because it's only like $2,500 more to fully fund Second Street and that's so much. I mean, I don't think that's gonna affect open space and dogwood so much since their need wasn't as high. And then we can then it's not spread so thin for Kalima and for Second Street. They were the top two highest scoring ones and they would be funded then.
I would agree with that, and that's how I suggested it be. So if there was support for that, I would also say that I would agree with that, as I think that they're going to need all the money they can to do that ADA ramp, to be honest with you. So, and it's really important. So anyway, I would be supportive of that if there was consensus to do that.
Could I ask a question on that? I guess the way I look at it at the 14.5, remember there was like painting and other things in there. So are we saying, I guess I'm trying to understand that to do the ADA, the upgrade on the concrete, that's going to take this full 17,253.
That is.
I know we don't have bid yet.
I don't have a bid for it,
Right.
but to do it right, there's, a lot of concrete, there's curbing, there's
Mhm.
railing. It's an expensive thing to do and to do it right. So I don't think they'll be able to afford any painting, and if they can do the roof, maybe some patchwork, but I think most of the funding would probably go to that ramp, to be honest. So that's what I'm thinking, but I don't have any specific bid to speak to that.
Well, I think those questions for me is why I didn't find that application that compelling, is I just wasn't really sure what we were going to get for the investment in it. And so I kind of downgraded it on like the catalytic potential, just because, okay, these businesses are already here. How is this going to really help that? I mean, clearly it's equitable outcomes and project need and all those kind of things, but it just, what exactly is going to happen here? So that's why for me, I didn't prioritize it as high as it got here. It was about the same as the rest of them.
My guess is that the owner is not terribly sophisticated on codes and didn't realize that, he's looking, oh, I want to paint it and I want to repair the roof, but, I took it from in that point of view. I hear what you're saying, but I do think those are 4 businesses that need to thrive, and we have an aging population that can't necessarily step up on those steps and really could use that ramp. So I lean towards supporting it more.
I agree, and also it was a BIPOC-owned business, and I think equity is important in that sense.
So how about we just, I'm just throwing out a proposal that I'm comfortable with.
I can
Increase,
pull up Excel too. I have it ready to go.
basically increase, like, pairing off what you were saying. Increase by 2,500, which brings it to 17 there, and 1,250 minus on open space and dogwood. And that's minimal impact of $1,200 to those two, but it gets us to that.
Okay, so it
But
was,
again, we don't know for sure, right? So this is sort of, we're speculating a bit, right? Of like what they put forth, right? Is the quote that we have, right? There's speculation that might not be sufficient. And then I think the proposal from the city was that this is front of the line, like
Right.
whatever, when this goes out the door, right? This is what needs to go first. And then, if you find as you move down that path that there's a gap to be filled there, I mean, that's on them, right? And so I think we need to be a little careful on this one, right? Because I think that it's great that we're having that expertise of sort of real world experience of like, that number, like, I'm not sure, but we also don't have that like concrete thing in their application either. So just want to flag that. And I think for me, like, just a comment or observation for me, I think we have these buckets, right? And they're all important, and they're also weighted. And I think for me, catalytic potential, that is a really key one here, right? Because we are still trying to spark so much of what this district can become. And so for me, that means that open space and Dogwood, those for me have more of that vibe and more of that thing going on than I would argue any of these other than Kalima Market do. And so I personally, I think I'm more supportive of funding option A as is, rather than adjusting it further. I get that they're kind of like incremental, small things that overall maybe don't matter, but I think it does matter, right? And I think sending a signal to the businesses who've put in bigger asks and essentially came out with less than their ask, like, I think that it's important to send a signal with that as well, right? So I where I'm at currently is A as is.
I would say, I totally agree with what you're saying, Corey. The only thing I would not necessarily push back, but I would add is, Second Street supports 4 businesses. And I get that it's going to the owner, who is not one of the businesses, but it does support 4 small businesses, which is a big plus for me, in that space. I'm honestly, I don't have a dog in this fight. I think all this is great. So where we land, I'm not going to necessarily, good, we're great. So I think A is great. I think if we want to give a little bit more to the one, because we're concerned about the amount, that's great too.
The other piece is that Second Street wouldn't be able to make the updates without our help. Sorry, I'm just looking at your numbers, Allie.
I'm open to tweaks. I just threw this together based on.
Yeah.
recommendation.
All right, well, we've got 3 options on the table here. I think there's been really good discussion and input about what folks want to see. Does anyone want to offer up any other comments, thoughts, and or sort of signal which way they're leaning of A, B, or C, which is C is our new kind of custom funding option with small tweaks to open space and Dogwood so that we're able to fully fund 12631 Northeast 2nd Street. Are folks ready to kind of indicate where they're at? Kathy, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I lean towards custom funding, but I don't feel so strongly that I'm willing to listen what everybody else has to say, and I can be persuaded. I think A or the custom funding, I'm leaning more towards, because Second Street and Kalima basically said they can't do it without our money. And open space and Dogwood are super catalytic, but I don't think the amount that we're taking away from them is determinative on them going forward or not, but I think it can make the difference for Second Street and Kalima. So I would lean towards the custom funding option myself.
I'm for option C for that exact reason that Kathy said, is that I don't think that taking away 2,500 from Dogwood or open space is going to break them from going forward. And I do think that the 4 businesses at Second Street are important and have, they have potential too. There's 4 businesses for C.
I probably still lean towards A, but if somebody made a motion for the custom funding option, I would support it.
Coin. I think C. And the major thing for me is making sure that ADA, because that's the one that's a compliance issue, right? Like that's the issue. And I really vacillate because we don't know how much it is like that, but I don't want to put it on hold. Like it needs to get done. I think at the end of the day, though, as we look at this and we step back and we're moving these numbers around, at the end of the day, this is free money to benefit the community. So any amount is a huge bonus, regardless of what we do. So I'm gonna roll with C.
Okay. Sounds good. Kina?
C for me.
All right, I'm in the same boat. I feel like it's a little bit splitting hairs, probably leaning more A, but sounds like most of the group is good with C. So is anyone ready for a motion?
I will make the motion to, do I have to say option C or custom financing?
Yeah, you can say the funding option that we developed in CAB and just, we're recommending this to Borough.
Ooh, all right, I will make the motion for the custom funding option that we discussed in CAB and recommend to Borough. Close.
I will second it.
All right. Motion from Jeff, second by Kina. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Kina, is your hand raised?
Yeah.
So that's unanimous.
Good work, all.
Sure.
Yeah, good job.
That
Yay.
better than I thought. Thanks to all the applicants that are in the room today too. I know that, yeah, just thanks for responding to all of our questions and for being here today.
All right, and I think we can go ahead and invite our other fellow CAB members back up to the dais. Thanks for taking a seat during that discussion.
And while we kind of have some of the applicants in the room too, just wanted to touch on implementation of the program. So now that this recommendation has been made, we'll bring that recommendation to the Bend Urban Renewal Agency, who's the same folks as City Council, to review this award recommendation at their February 7th meeting. So the award won't be finalized until February 7th, but we'll be in touch with you. You're more than welcome to come to that meeting as well. It will be a public meeting. The next step, once Borough does make funding awards, would be for staff to develop grant agreements with those awardees that would be approved by Borough. Yeah, Dale.
Since we've now voted and the table's level, could we be introduced to who the applicants were who were here? I just want to have faces to go with the names if possible.
Corey, are you open to that?
If that's fine.
Yeah, if the applicants want to kind of come up and just introduce themselves that are here today. If you want to, no pressure. I can also introduce you and you can wave if that. You can't hear you unless you come to the microphone.
So my name's Leah and we're with Open Space Event Studios. Charlie Teal.
Yeah, my name is Charlie Teal. I'm the owner of Open Space Event Studios and of course the garage building next to it. Open Space has now been just over 2 years in operation, opened at the tail end of the pandemic. That was fun. Now we are in the process of, as we say in this proposal, how we can expand our offerings, what we do by creating a new venue, a new feature, a new offering in the garage space next to us.
And I'll see you there at 6. I'm in the AIA. We're having our party there, so we'll see you there.
Party later,
Yes.
anybody.
Thank you for looking at our application.
Yeah. And however it may be relevant to you guys, I just want to recognize Leah, all the work that she put into this application. It's all her doing. I just sat back and was astounded at what you put together.
Good work.
This grant, it can be reapplied for, correct? From year to year? Is that?
Yeah, we will have that discussion. After this, we need to make sure that we have funding for next year's program. But we haven't had that discussion. This is like our first program, so we will kind of need to make that policy call with this board and Borough next year. But we'll keep you updated. Yeah, sorry. TBD. But I think you would be an example of a business that could benefit from reapplying, so we'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I think we do as a body want to hear from folks who applied, right? Like how, because the intent is, right, this isn't a hugely onerous thing, right? That it's something that is accessible, right? That, is something that like more folks can be aware of and throw their hats in the ring for, right? I mean, so I think like that's part of the improving and understanding, like, there's observations that are going to come from the staff's end, but I think something that would also be of interest is like hearing from the folks who applied this round, like how'd it work for you, right? Like what worked, what didn't, what would you like to see different, other, better the next time you throw your hat in the ring? Because I think we really want to hear that. And I guess would just encourage you to be sort of very, very candid of how that went. So, yeah.
Yeah, having follow some feedback.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Leah.
Yeah, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.
Yeah.
I'm Debbie Putnam, and this is Jamie. We're from Riverside Animal Hospital. We know that corner is a huge eyesore. And part of the reason why our application seems sort of all over the place is with the only project happening. We didn't know what to do. Like, we just didn't know how to make it better, but also provide for some of our needs. Like, we do need a few more parking spots. The whole thing is not going to be jammed with cars, but we want it to look nice. We want that corner to be like just much improved. And so you made a great suggestion to just start with like design, because we just were not ready yet for the big production. So
we also aren't clear on there's 3 different options we're looking at with that only street. So we're not exactly sure how that is going to affect that corner too. So to go with the assistance just made more sense while we're waiting for that process to be finalized. So we also know what's going to happen in that corner.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a challenging site too. So we wanted
Yeah.
to explore kind of the feasibility of doing something there.
It's just that you guys were my vet for 5 years till both pets passed away, and I love the care, so thank you. Hope I
Yes,
didn't
thank you.
offend you by my initial.
We recognize that the application was very loosey-goosey, but didn't know how to firm it up a little bit just because it's so in flux on that corner. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great. So just back to implementation of the program really quick. So the next step would be for us to develop grant agreements, with each of the businesses. I can't talk, sorry. And those grant agreements would be approved by borough, or staff would have the authority to approve them, but those will list out kind of what's eligible for reimbursement through the program, and like what are the eligible expenses. And then funds that are expended within 12 months prior to that grant agreement would be eligible for reimbursement. And then if the funds aren't spent within 18 months, or for some reason the business does not meet the grant agreement terms, we did want to kind of get your initial feedback on kind of 2 options. So option A would be we would award the remaining funds to projects in accordance with that ranking priority as kind of one option, or option B, we would kind of take any funds that don't get used and roll them into a future program year. So I don't know if there's initial thoughts on option A or option B.
I'm just a little concerned with the 18 months. For some of the projects, they may not be able to get it designed and into construction that quickly. I mean, hopefully most of them will, but there's a real difficulty in finding labor and materials right now. And I'm just wondering if the intent is, if they pull the permit within 18 months, but the construction hasn't started or something like that, because that's a tight timeline actually in the world of
Jonathan, are you
construction.
hearing Kathy? No.
So we could do that. As long as the construction has begun, the only downside to that is you have a limited pot of money to make those catalytic investments. So the longer it goes on, the less impact these dollars make. But if staff sees that within 12 months, that they've got another 12 months to go, but they've made substantial progress, then we could put in the grant agreement that you can come back for an extension. But we do have to see some movement within.
Yes,
within a
no,
fiscal year.
I understand that, but it is just tough to spend all that money, because a lot of times there's a pot held until the final construction and the walkthrough and the checklist. And so the funds aren't necessarily spent all up front. And just so that you understand that there's got to be some flexibility in there if, the reality of building right now is tough, and it doesn't always happen the way you might think it should happen.
And so you know, Ally's done a good job with like talking to these applicants. We've kind of put our heads together and kind of come up with a couple of things staff can do, but we do need to see movement within 18 months of something. And so let's say.
Well, getting a permit would be huge. I mean, just,
Well, and I think, so they're able to use the funds for permitting. So, and we'll allow for reimbursement, like they don't have to finish the project in order to get reimbursement. So we'll allow for,
okay,
our intent is to allow for like progress invoicing.
good.
So I think that should
That-
address
that-
some of
that-
your concerns,
yes,
Kathy.
That addresses it. Thank you.
So city permits will pretty much use the entire. application.
Thank you, Dale.
The time as well as the money, yeah.
Ally, is there gonna be, I mean, I would say this was a pretty successful, successful process in terms of, like Corey mentioned, accessibility. Is there gonna be any kind of continuation to connect with Latinx business owners? I mean, we clearly prioritize those two. Of course, they met the criteria. But yeah, curious to hear if there's going to be any kind of like long-term investment to continue down that path.
Yeah, I think it's something that we'll need to right now, our contract with Yannette is ending next week or in 2 weeks.
Okay.
We'll have to kind of reevaluate that in the next year. So our current contract to do that work is ending for the time period, but I think that our goal in working with those businesses on these grant agreements is to continue to make that grant agreement process acceptable and straightforward for them.
Yeah.
And then, if we were to do another application cycle, we would probably try to do some level of more equitable outreach for the next application cycle, where we would get support again.
Yeah, and just thinking, like you were talking about with the grant agreements, just making sure that there is someone who will be able to work with some of the business owners if there is some sort of barrier there, to ensure that they do understand completely what's coming up next.
Yeah, and I do know both Yameli and Marcos. Marcos owns Ola in downtown, the applicants, and Yameli does speak English fluently. So I'm not too concerned, at least with these two businesses, but I think if we had other businesses, we would want to make sure that we had translation support when we were working on those grant agreements.
Great, thank you.
Did other folks have thoughts or questions here? And then I think there was a specific point we were asked for input on, which is option A or option B for those scenarios where the money is not spent in the time frame that it needs to be.
I mean, this year might be different than all other years, right? Because this is the first year we're doing program.
Yeah, we can come back next year and kind of check in on this question again. We don't have to answer it 100% today, but it would be helpful to kind of just get an understanding of which direction the board is leaning towards.
So with option B, it would still remain within the business assistance
program.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like for this particular year, I would lean towards option A because of the catalytic potential of putting the dollars in as soon as possible. But that, I don't know that I would think that is true for every year. Like,
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's hard to know, and this is our first time through this to kind of see how it goes, and that'll kind of inform how we want to move forward in the future. So, but I would say A for now, and then reevaluate that in the future when we see how this one went.
Just logistically and timing wise, though, it could potentially be like 3 more grant time periods. And so it would then go to a year and a half ago recipients. That would be, I don't know, the other recipients would possibly be done with their project or should be done with their I'm just not sure how that all makes sense to me. So I think back into the bucket a year and a half later. for like future ones would
I
make
agree
sense.
with
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's
And-
because we're gonna be doing it 4 times a year instead of every other.
No, discussing maybe twice a year, but right now it's going to continue as an annual, like we've expended the funds for this upcoming year. So the soonest that we would run another grant cycle is for the following fiscal year. But still, the timing of it is still odd for me. So I think just rolling it into that same purpose for future.
I agree. I mean, I think 18 months is a lot of time for these type of tenant improvements. I know permitting takes a while and construction's slow these days, but a year and a half for TI, I mean, that's. And in a year and a half, things might shift with what has been ranked, you know, that's enough time for some dust to settle and perhaps priorities to shift. I like option B.
I also prefer option B.
It's option B, it's easier for staff. So,
Well, I'm not necessarily wedded to A. It seemed like a good idea, but hearing everyone else's comments, I'm fine with B as well.
Same.
Okay, that's helpful, but kind of just gives us some initial direction. So thanks.
And then, so we just said we're a little bit of ahead on the agenda, so just want to pin down like when's good to sort of get like evaluation, reflect, refine kind of piece of it, right? Like not only for the grant applicants, but I think for staff's perspective, like what worked, what didn't work, what are we improving for next time? Like, doesn't have to be something we kick the tires on this meeting, but just want to have a sense of like when you all think that's a good discussion to have so that we're kind of ready and have enough runway that we've done those things, but when we're ready to re-up in a year.
Yeah. I'll send a survey out before the end of the year and have CAB members maybe fill it out by like January 15th. And then we'll use those when we kind of rediscuss this program in future years. So before we start a new application cycle, we would bring out kind of that information and staff would kind of summarize what we learned from that. And we can also send one to applicants as well.
Can I make one comment just on the whole funding process before we move into the funding?
Yeah.
And it's just an observation about the ADA compliance piece of it. I thought was really interesting. That mentioning that then triggers a compliance violation and then raises it to the top of the list regardless of catalytic potential. I thought was just a really interesting thing to observe how that waded into the application piece. And I'll just point out that there's many buildings in the central district and in the core area that are non-compliant by the strict standards of ADA, and to upgrade all of them would be outside of lots of budgets and not necessarily catalytic. So I decided to make that comment. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see how that impacted funding priority. And of course, it's important. But when I think about the vision that we've talked about and the catalytic potential projects, it isn't the highest thing on in my conscience. And when I think about the really cool cities that I go to and the funky spots that are very walkable and inspired, they don't necessarily meet all of the letter of the ADA code. So I just thought I'd want to make that observation.
It's an interesting point because, I mean, with urban renewal like this, there will be buildings that go out and are replaced, like the Les Schwab site, for example. And, you know, we could end up spending lots of money bringing up buildings to ADA standards that are ultimately not going to be there much longer. So, you know, I don't really think we should be doing all that necessarily our primary function, at least.
You know, it came to my attention when I read the application, and it seemed clear that all 4 tenants were saying it's a problem for them. You know, I understand what you're saying, and there's a lot of times where it's so difficult to make it work. And, you know, as an architect, I'm very liable for this as an issue, so it just comes up for me. But what really triggered it for me was the 4 tenants telling the owner, this is a problem we need to fix. And that's why it raised up for me on this particular item.
I did forget to, if we could have a CAB member volunteer to when the award recommendation goes to Borough on February 7th, it would be great to have a CAB member there to speak to the recommendation.
I hope to be in Egypt.
Nice. Yeah. I'm looking at Corey in case, in case as chair.
I'm gonna be in front of council a lot in January and February. I'm sure I could, if other folks want some time in front of our city councilors, please jump on in.
Pool is small, I don't think three of us can, so.
That's true. I know. Yeah. February 7th.
February 7th. It will be at the end of the council agenda, so it will be. Sorry.
Oops.
That's a big selling point.
I know. I wasn't too excited about it either. I asked for it to go before, but I got denied.
That should be fine. I think it'll be fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Corey.
Yeah. All right. Okay, this one's gonna be a good one too. So let's move on. Probably good. Well, we have just a little more time maybe for this one, but core area funding update. So I think we're inviting Jonathan up again.
It's all brought up. Too.
All right, so I'm up here not because I want to be, but because it's easier to control the actual computer. So we've had some challenges this year that we were not expecting in terms of TIF generation. So the question today to CAB that you need to start considering over the next few months is how do we manage TIF over the next 10 years? So the takeaways that I want us to talk about today is we want to highlight the performance of our TIF and general market in the core area. What will be the priorities of CAB with this new information? And then what role should TIF be over this time frame, given the information that you're going to hear today? So right now, the market in the core area, we have had a much lower growth rate than the plan adoption in 2020. The plan adoption in 2020 estimated a 4% growth rate. This past year, we had 0. The prior year, we had right around 1%. So we've seen a noticeable decline in TIF generation. And that doesn't mean that we don't get TIF. It just means we don't get the amount of TIF that we had projected over the last 3 years. Change of property ratio, that is the CPR that is applied by the county assessor to new development and property development. So for example, in 2019, commercial is at 55. This year is at 44.1. So what they do is they assess the new value of the ratio of new development. And then that's the amount of increment that that property generates of new development. So much lower. In the core area, we've had limited development so far. We see new development, but we haven't actualized that on the tax rolls. And city purchases of tax exempt properties has also decreased the TIF generation. And then our current commitment of TIF dollars to current transportation projects has also, in a shorter period of time, limited TIF generation in general. So this is what, there we go. So in the dark green, that is your adopted TIF plan, TIF generation over until 2034. The light green is the actual revenues. And then the blue is the adopted CIP budget at the 3% growth rate that council passed in their biennium budget. As you can see, we're seeing a massive variation in TIF generation. With the biennium budget versus the actual and revised annual growth rate, we're seeing even a further decrease in TIF generation. So for example, the TIF plan document by the close of 30 years is going to generate $195 million in maximum indebtedness. Right now, without MUPTI and the new development, so this is a very conservative number, we're at 120 million. So much, much less than what the original plan document foretold. Right now, the adopted CIP and program budget is as follows, and we'll get to the changes here in a second. So you had the CAB programming of the programs, and then you also had the adopted CIP by both borough and city council. The first year you had $900,000 adopted by fiscal year end 24 for business assistance and development assistance. And then we roughly had $1 million for the Franklin corridor improvements and Second Street streetscape improvements. And then next year, 3 million for CIP, 600,000 for programming and so forth. With that being said, if no changes had been made by city management at our recommendation, we would have ran out of money, literally, of TIF by 2027. And what that means is we don't run out of money specifically, we run out of the ability to bond in order to finance the projects further than the committed CIP projects. So if we just focused on the CIP budget with the revised growth rate and the $100,000 for business assistance this year, we will remain stable for TIF generation, but we may not be able to actually initiate a second bond for any CIP projects until 2031. So why does this matter? The TIF plan over 30 years is going to be very healthy with MUPTI coming online starting in 2027. That'll be a 10-year increment that Urban Renewal gives up on behalf of a council priority, which is a policy decision, and that is fine. Once that falls off, TIF dramatically increases. So it's this 10-year window that we're trying to have to balance expectations and manage investments. With the MUPTI exemptions coming off in 2032, we will go from 120 million of that original projected down from 195 back up to 170. So it's this 10, like I'm saying, I got to reiterate, it's just this 10 years that we've got to really focus on where we put our money and how we invest. We can only bond debt based on the increment that we generate or anticipate to generate. So for example, we can bond $10 million right now, but can we actually debt service that over the next 20 years with the increment that we generate every year? Because we also pay our salaries out of TIF, we pay our benefits, we pay business assistance, we pay materials and services. We also contribute to the general fund, and we pay for legal's portion, we pay for finances portion. There's a lot of other moving parts of that. Unfortunately, well, I don't want to say unfortunately because that's a wrong word. Transportation is very important, but the first projects don't generate TIF. And so they will eventually, but the first 7 million, we're not going to get a return on investment that's actualized in the first 8 to 10 years. Post MUPTI, MUPTI is serving as a catalytic effort. I mean, we've had 4 applications. You see one right now. We've modeled a very conservative approach. Council's done a great job with staff direction on that. We're gonna actualize that in about 2031. But right now we have to kind of prepare for that cost sharing when those come online because it'll be greater than 14%. And we are required by our plan document to share funds with the taxing jurisdictions if it meets that threshold.
Just to clarify that a little bit more. So if we provide it, like, let's use Jack Straw for an example. They've applied for MUPTI. They've received some approvals by some of the taxing districts, but haven't received council approval yet. If they were to get a MUPTI exemption, so the 10-year exemption, the year that exemption expires, because that project generates so much TIF, they could raise the whole TIF generation above 14%, which means we have to share some of that increment that we generate with all the overlapping taxing districts, which is like a successful. Right, that's like success, yay, we did it. But it just means that Borough doesn't collect all of that increment from that year. We have to share it.
And the positive note to this is if these 4 projects generate more than our conservative models approach, we could actually see a larger maximum indebtedness meet. And so we want to bring an actual reasonable approach to this body and also to Borough and Council, just so there's no overcommitment or lack of expectation in the community. So what does this mean short term? By city management direction, we are eliminating program expenditures right now, except for the business assistance program, as we noted a few months ago to this body. We are fully committing to transportation projects through this CIP. We have to understand that post Hawthorne, URA may not have the funds for the CIP budget cycle at this model. We are now expecting CIP cost overages, and Borough is to consider the CIP updates in Q1 and Q2. Later in 2024, we will begin bond efforts for the transportation improvement projects. The city is going to reevaluate the MUPTI program. And in January 17th, City Council will hear from various staff about our overall development incentives program, including MUPTI, TIF, our housing, enterprise zone, all those things, because we want council to be successful in implementing their community goals to meet affordable housing, attainable housing, small business assistance, transportation, in an equitable approach, but we also want to provide a return on investment so they can further do those type of things. So if we're not generating a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 investment portfolio for council, they can't do the things that they want to do. So it's going to be a beginning conversation in January. No decision is going to be made, but we want to make sure that TIF isn't cannibalizing the housing, MUPTI's not cannibalizing TIF, our GO bond isn't cannibalizing both. It's those like a really broad discussion, but it's going to begin in January. And then also work with our taxing jurisdictions to also maybe permanently set some of the exemptions they've offered. So it's a huge holistic process that the city manager's leading and staff is really kind of helping further that conversation so we can meet those council goals.
Jonathan, can I ask a question?
Yes.
There's a lot of acronyms on.
Yeah, sorry about that. Welcome to government.
Is the short term what you're saying that after the Hawthorne projects that we wouldn't be able to fund any more CIP, which are transportation projects?
It means that during that next 5-year CIP,
Until
it could, we
2031?
could be where urban renewal doesn't commit to any of those projects, which right now there aren't any by that time. It's just, there could be, if there is no growth that we've seen, we would have to just kind of circle the wagons and let TIF generate and then go back to bond.
Yeah, so like this year, late 2024, we'll initiate a bond, so a loan to help fund the CIP that we currently have. So what he's saying is like, we'd be able to do like one more to fund Hawthorne, or are you including Hawthorne in the current one?
Oh, we're just including Hawthorne through this CIP expectation. So the
In
1
the,
point,
in the bond?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, so they'll bond the 3 million for Hawthorne now, but we may not be able to initiate the next bond until 2031 unless we see higher growth rates and more increment being generated.
Okay, and the other is Hawthorne the, like, we also have Franklin and Greenwood and.
So the bond will include that CIP as adopted. So all the funds for this will be initiated in that loan.
Okay.
And we're also projecting some cost overages for the 3 projects on the bottom. So we'll buffer that bond amount to be able to cover any like anticipated cost overages.
And if we see more growth, let's say, for example, because we collect in September, we get the money November. If we see a massive increase, this will be a different conversation. It's just for the next 2 to 5 years, we're being realistic with this body and council, just like, because we can bond every year, but we still have to have the ability to make those payments. So for example, like Ali was saying, we could bond all this at one time. We would not recommend that because why bond for something in 2028 this year? So we could bond 500,000 in 2024 just to make general payments. I don't know if that's worth it because you got bond council payments, you got closing docs, you have all those things. But if, like, for example, 2025, we include the 4.5 million, that would be our first bond. And right now interest rates are high. So we're trying to maximize these dollars because what I'd like to see, and this is my personal goal, is that this body has some more money for programming expenses next year. And we're trying to, that's why finance and I have been working the last couple of months to kind of stretch these dollars as much as possible, but also realizing that the market isn't moving as quickly as we had anticipated post-COVID.
Second question. Oh, do you want?
No, go ahead.
Well, Kathy too.
Oh, sorry, Lisa,
So-
why don't we let Dale and Kathy and then you're up, okay? Go ahead.
Oh, Dan.
Good. Well, this is the one I was kind of curious about. So I'm just kind of trying to understand why the number's lower than anticipated, because, we knew Mupti was gonna happen. We knew the city was gonna buy some properties. I didn't really understand the valuation thing that you started with. Was that something unanticipated that the county's, is that from the county assessor's office?
That's
or
going to be a
county
question for
commissioner?
them, but they've been consistently downgrading those CPR adjustments since 2019.
CPR is.
So it's the cost, it is the change property ratio. And it's just basically, it's part of the whole property tax convolution of the state, which the entire community can only grow at 3%.
Okay.
And so they have to balance the new development and new property with the existing property that's already there. It's the assessed valuation increase to prevent the compression. It's some algorithm. We all know that the property tax system in Oregon needs to be massively updated. But that's what we have to work with.
So,
But
I-
what was your other
so
question?
ba-
What was your other question?
No, I understand that part of it now. Thank you for that
Yeah, so I think
explanation.
like if you had commercial, like commercial property and residential property have different CPR ratios, right? Or, depending on the type of property you have. So if your assessed value gets ranked at a certain level, we like multiply that, right, by the CPR rate. And so it went from 51 to 44. So the like multiplier went down by like 10%, and therefore increment went down pretty significantly as
My eyes are
well.
glazing over.
Yeah,
It's-
sorry,
it's
Dale.
hard to understand what it but does the so are the higher interest rates, those also are impacting us pretty significantly, I would imagine?
Well, it will for our bond, but it's also impacting construction because they're,
Sure, yeah.
but
I understand.
to circle back to
Dale
the
works for a
CPR.
development firm.
So this is the catch-22 with meeting a community need, right? So we need housing. We desperately need housing. I rent. It took me a while when I first moved here to find commercial property is new development is 44.9. That's the CPR ratio. For residential, they also classify it as unbuildable. So it's 36.6. So it's a much less return on investment for those things. So it's like, that's that catch-22. We want affordable and attainable and market rate housing, and we're going to see that in the core, but it's not going to generate as much increment as a commercial property does.
And then we're doing tax exemptions for a period
Yes.
of time on top of that, so.
Yeah.
Got it.
But like I said, it's a policy decision that I personally feel was rightly made.
Yeah, I don't think it's wrong.
Yeah,
It's just that-
it's that trade-off. It's the 10-year trade-off of a long-term community benefit, but that short-term lack of return.
Okay, so we've got about 5 more minutes for this agenda item. So I've got Kathy, John, did you have a comment? And then also Elisa? Okay,
Real quick, I was going to mention that I think the interest rates has significantly depressed development. But at the same time, I'm thinking all of the infrastructure that the city is planning to do will help reduce offsite costs for a lot of development and should spur that development. But I think you're wise in being cautious. But there's a part of me that's optimistic that this is going to get better. But I totally am unaware of the whole tax stuff that you're talking about. And so that I think it's smart to let us know what's going on. I do hope that interest rates will decline, and I hope that offsite costs will be reduced and development will go forward, but that's me being optimistic. So thank you for explaining it. And also the fact that housing is going to contribute less than other commercial. I didn't realize that either. So this is very interesting.
Directly, but see, when people live in these units, they will spend money elsewhere. But right now, I just have to realize what the numbers we got.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm glad you're on it. It's a little depressing though.
yeah. John and then Lisa.
Just a general question about the MUPD. Jack Straw is under construction. Why would council award the MUPD to a project that's already funded and being built? Isn't that to incentivize new housing construction?
Yeah, so they applied, they've been anticipating applying for the project the entire time that we've had the MUFTI program, and they submitted their application quite a few months ago. This conversation came up, they recently presented to the park board to get approval, and they did include MUFTI in their underwriting when they got their loans to start or initiate construction of the project, prior to getting the approval, which was a little awkward. We recognize, but they assumed because they met the program criteria and were within the TIF area that there wouldn't be significant concerns about their application being approved, which was risky. But so far they've been moving forward. But we had the financial consultant do an analysis, that confirmed that the project isn't viable without MUPD.
Sorry, and Elisa, you still had a comment too. So let's go to Elisa and then Elisa.
I'm trying to figure out how to state this, but so some of the items are things that are like passive. We can't do anything about it. Interest rates are going to happen. The CPR is going to change. So curious what the city could do, maybe what we could do, recommendations that we could do, because I think the things that we could have some impact on as a city and maybe as our board are why there's limited development and growth in the area. So we were expecting great things. It didn't happen. What can we do as a CAB to recommend, or what could city council do, or codes, or like, have you guys gotten into that yet of like, what can we actually do to impact a positive change here?
Yeah, so I think that's where the incentive conversation is coming online in January, just to have the beginning. We've already at staff level been talking about that Ben's team is talking, you know, they're in charge of managing and making sure permits go through in a timely and efficiently manner. Another thing that most urban renewals go through is they usually go through a 5-year window at the very beginning of a plan adoption where they just kind of let the increment generate. But because Bend is growing so fast, borough and council and staff had to make choices in the kind of the immediate term to make a positive benefit on like 2nd Street and Franklin Crossing and the Hawthorne Crossing, stuff that's been identified long before the urban renewal plan was adopted. And so that is urban renewal is a tool. And other things that make urban renewal more successful is active recruitment by the business community, whether that is EDCO or the city. That's how Prosper Portland uses it. That's how Eugene has used it, Salem. And so, but to your question, yeah, we're figuring out in this interim, what could we do to help further catalyze the area?
I think part of it is just making some of the larger projects that are planned for the area continue to move forward with rising interest rates. So we're having pretty active conversations with some of the big developers, and MUPD is one of the tools to try to incentivize them to keep moving forward. Some like Timber Yards development, for example, if that hotel parcel were to be constructed, it would generate significant TIF. It's going to any project that moves forward now is not going to hit the tax rolls till 2027, 2028. So there's nothing that, there's not a ton that we can really do for these next, 3 to 5 years of increment other than like smaller remodels and smaller investments into the district. But it's really making sure that those bigger projects continue to move forward. And Jack Straw, even with getting them up to exemption, they're building 14,000 square feet of commercial space that will not be exempt from taxes. So we'll be getting the increment from their commercial improvements. And then, same thing if the platform project on Les Schwab site moves forward, which we're in conversations with them about, Franklin improvements are some of the frontage improvements that they would need to make. So we're able to waive some of their infrastructure requirements by having the city build those. Same thing with 2nd Street. Kurt's project is not having to be required to build those improvements if the city builds 2nd Street. So there is benefit, I think, still to some of the infrastructure improvements that we're making, but it's really going to be continuing to ensure that some of those larger projects keep momentum moving forward on their projects, and they need incentives to be able to do that with interest rates where they're at. And so MUPD is still a great tool to keep those projects moving forward.
Thank you. Lisa?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, not obviously the news any of us want to see regarding this, but appreciate, the analysis, appreciate being updated. I think that the things that we do have on our CIP, I mean, the reason that we as a body pick them is because those are really going to lift all boats. And so those are things that are moving forward. And so I think from a community perspective of like things starting to look and feel different there, those are pretty major projects. And so I think that those are good signals to be sending. I'm glad that those are continuing. I think that when we look ahead to next year, as conversations play out, understanding what we can do and not do at CAB, right? So I know the development assistance pot of money, right, is a big pot of money. And so I think just understanding some of the implications for some of the things and programs that we've imagined, putting forth as this body, I think we just, want to kind of keep updated on that, right? And sort of what the implications are for like what we can and can't do there. So
So when we know the loan costs later, well, in 2024, I have some ideas about maybe retooling the development assistance program where it's not just a cash disbursement, but something more like Juniper Ridge that we do, which could be simple, which is a tax reimbursement over a specific period of time up to a specific period of amount based on the generation value of that property. And so it's just we're percolating ideas to keep this body active and, going forward, but also meeting the goals that you've set, but also in a realistic manner.
Okay, any other final comments before we move on to our next agenda item? I can't see you, but I'm assuming no. Okay. All right, we will go ahead and move to work plan and CAB schedule with Ally. Jonathan, thank you.
And I did just want to say for the development assistance program, we have officially put that program on pause, given the financial update. We did receive 3 applications before we did put it on pause, and those were all applications that also applied for MUPD. So we've been prioritizing those applicants' MUPD applications in kind of instead or in conjunction with. So just wanted to kind of give an update of where all 3 of those are with their MUPD program, because that's kind of how we can support those developments, given that the development assistance program is on pause.
Where exactly is Jackstrove?
Right by the box factory.
2 big old tower cranes.
Oh yeah, I've seen.
Light up the whole.
So we did have our first project be completely approved for MUPD for the first time. So that was the platform project on Franklin Avenue by Project PDX. So
I had a question because I knew they had a shortfall based on their projections. Does this, and it'd be nice if we got word from the developer, but does this put them over the top? Are they committed? Because I see in the
I don't
news,
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
The project is financially constrained even with MUPD. So we'll see when and if the developer continues to move forward. They do have their site plan approved. So.
And how long is MUPD, how long can they take advantage of that until it goes away?
I'm like looking at Elizabeth. I think we have a code expiration built into our code, so they would need to begin construction prior to that. Maybe Elizabeth will confirm.
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth Oshel with the City Attorney's Office. So Ally's right, they have to begin construction by 2031, but the resolution and the council approval is for the site plan that's been approved, and that has a much shorter expiration period, I think
2 years.
2 years. So.
Okay.
Is there an extension on that or no?
There's not an extension on the site plan approval, although council could pass another resolution. And there is a extension built into the MUPD ordinance that allows an extension of up to 1 year past 2031.
Council is actually considering providing extensions for site plan approvals.
Yeah, they should do that.
Yeah, separately from MUPD.
Separately from MUPD, but
generally for
in
site plan.
general, they're considering doing that.
Yeah,
because of
during the Great
market.
Recession, a lot of cities, did that for their tentative maps and, it just, people couldn't move forward with the interest rates.
Yeah, I think Ben did as well. So it's before council, aside from MUPD, and then since council approves MUPD by resolution, they could consider whether to change their approval for the site plan if that came before them.
Thanks.
All right. All right, now we're ready for CAB work plan and schedule updates. Ally, take it away.
Cool. Yeah, so I wasn't at the October meeting, but I listened to it, and I know that there's kind of a lot of questions that got posed about the work plan. So I'm hoping to kind of help re-answer those. But just wanted to kind of give an update of where I think CAB will go in 2024. So we did a recruitment process. Kurt and Keena are both have both decided to rotate off of CAB with their 2-year terms ending. So we'll have a little thank you at the end, but thank you both for all of your time on CAB. We did give one of the open slots to Elaine Fardella, who's been an alternate for CAB, who will be rotating onto the board. And then we're still recruiting for property owner, business owner. And that application is open through December 31st. So if you want to share that with somebody that you think that's a property owner, business owner, or management representative of a property or business owner, that's kind of the role that we're trying to fill for the last remaining member. And then when we bring back CAB in 2024 with those 2 new members, we'll probably schedule a longer meeting in February, kind of more of like an orientation or in-depth, I guess, kind of retreat, like Jonathan mentioned at the last meeting. But we plan to move CAB to a quarterly meeting basis after that. And then we would establish subcommittees for kind of new projects or efforts. So like the code audit and the street standards. So that way we're not necessarily meeting as a board every month, but we would meet quarterly, but with those subcommittees meeting as needed. So hopefully it frees up some of your time, but, and this is kind of just the work plan. I just wanted to, we do have Pauline scoped to support with both the code audit and street and standards. I've already added that to her work plan. And they were actually, some of the planners were like pinging me about some code standard that they found that they didn't think worked. So I was like, let's just talk about it next year. We have a whole project to do that. So, and then we don't have a ton of budget to hire consultants to support with work. I think there's opportunity to partner with our engineering department on some of their existing on-call contracts to do some of the kind of mobility studies in the area, but it would be pretty like narrow, like a memo on kind of no car streets or something like that. But it's mostly going to be staff led work completing this work. So I think there's opportunities for kind of very narrow scope opportunities from consultants, but generally this is going to be a staff led effort. There are questions on kind of the work plan?
Is there a possibility to apply for grants to get funding for some of this planning stuff? I know you mentioned grants on something else, didn't you?
If that was specific for like green infrastructure and urban tree canopy kind of related work. But there is a ton of federal money related to.
I'm sure there's people that just do nothing but apply for grants in the city, so.
Yeah, I
just
mean,
wondering-
we actually don't have like a grant writer for the city. We hired one that specifically worked on transportation grants, and that's how we were successful in receiving the 25 million for Hawthorne and like $1.5 million for Reed Market. But it's something that we could look at. It also takes staff resources to apply for grants. So there's pretty limited planning grants, like the TGM grants are one option, but I'll look into it, but there aren't any off the top of my head that I'm aware of that would be like a great fit for us.
We can't award ourselves a design assistant.
No, sorry. Also for like the code audit work, we can't actually use TIF funding for that because it's like a city council. It's not a borough. It's not in our TIF plan to do code audits. It's not an eligible TIF plan expense. So there are certain things that are kind of more city council staff oriented versus like TIF borough oriented. You don't have to know that stuff, but just.
Is there any follow-up with council, like, or are we good to go on sort of where our work plan is pointing us for 24? Are there any other kind of like needed commitments there?
I think we're good to go. I think we've sent the letter to council and we're going to do a check-in on the council goals in January. So we'll invite probably Corey to come just engage in that, just like they do quarterly updates on a quarterly basis. And the one on housing and sustainable development is scheduled in January. So we'll do a quarterly update on that and kind of give them just, hey, here's what CAB's up to.
Great. Other questions or comments? I want to make sure we have time for public comment because we've received quite a few things into the record. So any other kind of comments, questions about work plan or schedule? And the shift to kind of quarterly meetings for this full body and then subcommittees for additional work that's going to come up. Could I just do a quick signal of like who's interested in being on a subcommittee for the code or the street standard work? Okay.
Cool. Yeah, and then we'll have 2 new members as well.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and turn to public comment. As mentioned, I think most of our public comment that we've received into the record with letters and then folks we have in the room today that want to provide public comment pertain to Second Street. I think that it does it's important to recognize that this group has talked about Second Street and what's happening there a number of times, and we've essentially landed in a place where we've said Second Street, and as this last conversation, I think further highlights, right, moving forward with these projects is important. Continuing to sort of stretch into those good ideas as we are able, we want to see that. So that's where this group has landed. It's reflected in our work plan. So I think Ally's been very clear with folks who've submitted into the record and who are here today that we of course appreciate the comments, but also to direct those to City Council, who's taking up this issue on Wednesday, is really kind of the best place for those comments. So if you've already, if that's on your radar, that's great. But just want to flag that for folks who are listening in here today, that's really an important sort of public comment opportunity for this particular issue. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open up public comment. And I don't know if we have anyone joining us online, but why don't we start with folks in the room?
Corey, do you mind if I just kind of give like a quick overview of Second Street
sure.
before we open it up to public comment? Because I did get everyone's comments. I just want to reiterate that the city is committed to completing Second Street. I know some comments mentioned that there was like indication of putting the project on pause or delaying the project, but we have dedicated staff and we are actively working to hire a design build team, which is the fastest project delivery option that the city can provide to deliver projects. And City Council is scheduled to hear the award of that design build contract at their meeting next Wednesday. That the scope of project for Second Street is going to include an open house prior to 30% design. So that open house is a great opportunity for folks that have design input into the project to attend that open house meeting where the project team is scoped to hear those comments and respond to them. The build out of the scope is really intended to build out the cross section in the BCD, but this, city staff and the project team are open to minor modifications. That cross section does provide an LTS1 facility, and they are going to look at prioritized bike and ped connectivity and safety at key intersections, so Hawthorne, Greenwood, and Franklin in particular, and even evaluate raised and enhanced intersections, potentially even looking at stop control on Hawthorne where there isn't today. They're also planning to coordinate with Pacific Power on just the feasibility and cost of undergrounding utility infrastructure. They would not be doing any of the private connections, but they are going to look into what it would take to provide the transformers for future private conversion to undergrounding. But I think that there's still kind of questions about whether that's a good use of the funding.
LTS, what is that?
Oh, so yeah, sorry, low stress facility. So it's a low stress bicycle facility. And so the way that gets calculated is you put like the the corridor speed, the width of the travel lanes, blah, blah, and it
Get that, I
creates.
just, the acronym didn't.
Yeah, sorry, level of traffic stress 1.
Gotcha, not.
So this, even though this is a Shero, this is still considered a level of traffic stress 1 facility for bicycles. And then they are also planning to look at different streetscape elements. So they are planning to include bike racks along this corridor, which is not typical in our normal street standards, raised and enhanced intersections, raised parking. So where the parking on the sides would actually be kind of elevated from street level, but not quite at the curb level, so that it delineates the street and helps narrow the street to promote traffic calming. And they are going to be looking at doing, graded street trees, which would allow the sidewalks to actually be, 12 feet in between the trees themselves. So just wanted to kind of give an overview of what the intent of Second Street really is and how we're already incorporating some of the feedback that we're hearing from the community.
Great. Thank you, Ally.
Sorry.
Oh, you're great. Okay, well, good context. And so, yeah, let's open up public comment. We'll start with folks in the room and then we'll turn to folks, anyone who's joining us online. So, Ally, do you have a list of folks who
I think
like
David and James are both here, but I
Okay.
don't see anyone online that's planning to submit comments.
Hi, I'm James Teeter. I am a structural civil engineer. I live near the core area and I walk Second Street quite often. I drew a series of pictures. I hope you all have an opportunity to look at them. I wanted to point out how excited I am about Second Street, but also how cautious I am, how fearful I am of the standard of construction. And the LTS1, I think is a great idea, but it is the street that we have on Minnesota in downtown. and also through Northwest Crossing. And so I don't think most parents would let their child bike on those streets. And my concern is not with shared facilities, but that we're putting bikes on streets that look like they're for cars. And what I think is a better investment on our part is to put cars on a street that looks like it's for bikes. And in making that distinction clear as a body, as you guys, what I'm asking for is you to make a recommendation to City Council, because my opinion doesn't mean much, but if you all agree, then your opinion means a lot. Yeah, the street section that the code is asking for is 36 feet wide. And what we have out there is 30 feet wide. And so moving a curb 3 feet well, moving a curb in general is the expensive part of redesigning a street, and moving it 3 feet, making a street wider, I don't see that as being like a safer street in general. Don't think that that entices development. And so Ali mentioned there are a lot of design things we can do. I really think we should lean into our intention with this street and not specifically ask for design elements, but ask for a bicycle boulevard. Because I think that whether you're walking on the street or you're in a parklet eating, that it's much nicer to have bikes going by you that are quiet than having roadway and cut through traffic for 3rd Street, frankly. So I hope to show you with my images what we can do. We don't have to slow down the process. It doesn't have to be any more expensive. But I do think that if we don't ask for something intentionally, we won't get it. And I hope that you guys will feel the same way, and that you as a group will ask City Council to make it a bicycle boulevard. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks.
Hi, my name's David Green. I'm with Ben Bikes. Ben Bikes is really excited about the core area. We want it to move forward. The discussions that we just heard today make it really imperative that we move fast on 2nd Street. It's gonna, if we don't move on 2nd Street, it's gonna hold up all the development that's planned along there. That said, the street that's planned with the 11-foot lanes, cars are very comfortable driving at 45 or 50 miles an hour on 11-foot lanes. There is no way that we can put bikes with sharrows on a street that's straight through at that and call it an LTS1, calls it safe for all people at all ages and abilities. There's no way any parent's gonna let a 10-year-old kid ride on that street. That said, again, there are a lot of design elements that we can add to that street, even if we put the profile in that is proposed. We can put different surfaces with different colors and textures that make the street look narrower, that make it look like it's this direction instead of this direction. The parking, having it raised, makes it look like it's narrower because the parking doesn't look like it's part of the street. The trees will help enclose it if we do a good job with trees and make traffic move slower. Having raised crosswalks both at the intersections and mid-block will really slow traffic down. They'll act like speed bumps, but they won't look like speed bumps. And finally, developing a traffic pattern through their area so that cars don't have a chance to build up speed going many blocks. All that stuff is really important. And if we don't do that in the design, we'll get a street that is not comfortable to walk on, it's not comfortable to bike on, and will defeat the whole purpose of having a mixed use commercial area that's people friendly and really vibrant and what everybody wants this area to look like. So it's going to be really important, I think, as James said, to have you weigh in with council to say, we need a street that we want, not a street that is going to be fast traffic and really essentially keeps people off the street. And again, moving curbs out 3 feet on each side to narrow the possibility for sidewalks, which is where the activity really should be occurring rather than on the street. That feels like we're taking a really big step backwards, spending a lot of money to make a street that we don't want. So let's move forward on this. Let's not let this slow down development. We need to move this forward, but we also need to remember that this street we're going to live with for 20 or 30 years. And if we build it now the wrong way, we're going to defeat the whole purpose of the core area. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other folks who would like to offer public comment today? I'm not seeing anyone online.
Can we discuss the comments? I just had one.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I really liked the images that I saw from James. And I especially like the point that we're investing such a huge amount on the Hawthorne overcrossing, that having that dump into kind of a standard, the standard that we see that is still fairly car-centric, seems like not the best idea. And I think for a while we've been talking about and kind of asking for, like, let's zoom out and look at like how these systems connect, and really what we've discussed is, well, we don't really have resources to do that, and the fact that that Ben Bikes put forward so much effort to show, hey, this is a bike boulevard, here's how it would connect to the broader grid, here's how it serves the vision of Drake to Juniper. I feel inclined to recommend what we can in our capacity to implement those types of treatments. And I just agree that if we're going to be putting TIF monies towards Second Street, this body has voted to put money out of the core area funds into Second Street. It should serve the vision. And so that I feel kind of does give us some say over, well, what is the vision and how is that achieved? I don't know if we can motion to make a recommendation or what's appropriate there, but I feel pretty compelled to be supportive of that. I guess that's all I have to say.
I think just that we have 2 minutes of the scheduled meeting left. The action that CAP could take is to direct staff to draft a letter to council related to Second Street in particular, and would need kind of direction on what you actually want to include in that letter, but that would be like the motion and the recommendation.
I would like to do that. I would like to move that we write a letter to council with that direction of what we would like to see. One of the things, my take on following up on what David and James were saying too, is what we want to see is Second Street to look like a commercial mixed-use street that's a vibrant core area street and not just any other street in Bend. That's what I would direct the letter to say.
Could the letter include the information that was presented to us, the drawings and?
We've James and David have sent your comments to city council as well. Have you sent yours, James? Okay, well, I know David has submitted, like I've asked all the folks that submitted comment, like this isn't necessarily on CAB's agenda, so please send your comments to city council. So it probably has gone to them directly. We could resend them, but.
Well, I think it would be nice just to mention it and say that, it would be great to have them continue on to work with the consultants, but, to keep an open mind of what opportunities are out there and have that future vision of what it is that we hope to see. I would be supportive of that.
When is council hearing this?
They're planning to award the
week.
design build contract on Wednesday.
Is that, are they going to be specifically saying design it like this at that meeting, or are we better off weighing in on the workshops?
The open house is typically the correct venue to weigh in on design features of projects.
Because I think it would be nice to say, out of these alternatives, we like this one.
So I will, like, the Second Street project does not include an alternatives analysis in the scope. It includes an open house and 30% design, but we did not scope for alternatives analysis for Second Street because
really because we have that
we have a
specific.
code adopted cross section to move forward with.
So the city would have to do a waiver to public improvement standards to do something less than that?
Well, it's all under
at this
Borough's
point?
control, isn't it? I mean, Borough wrote the BCD, and there's lots of people at that time that thought that it could have done better in defining certain streets, and a lot has evolved since that BCD document came out. So, I mean, it seems like, like I think it would just be a shame to be like, well, all these things are in place, and so you can't actually make any adjustments.
I think something to keep in mind is adding an alternatives analysis is going to delay the delivery of the project and increase project costs. So that is, that you can't have that without that.
I don't think we necessarily need to have a super in-depth alternatives analysis. What I'm in favor of, writing a letter to council now so that they know that we want to see something different from the get-go. Like, so that an entire street cross-section isn't designed and put forth at 30% design that's not in the direction that we want it to be. Like, if we can just indicate what the direction we want it to be is now, then we don't need 7 different alternates.
And we're talking about going from 11-foot lanes to 10-foot lanes, and then making a chicane by alternating parking is like, that doesn't sound like that would add budget or time.
What does city staff think? Will it add budget and time?
Adding an alternatives analysis will add budget and time.
So I think this is why I kind of kicked off with my comments of like, we've talked about Second Street a lot as a group, right? Like we have, right? And we had this whole discussion about not like the train is moving and it's going, right? And we need that train to go. We just heard about what the state of the TIF is, right? And the need for particularly the projects that the city is funding to move forward and move forward quickly without delay. And so I think what I heard from staff, and this is my opinion, of how they're trying to incorporate these fantastic ideas that came from Dutch Bikes, that came from your submitted testimony, really trying to move in the direction of saying, we hear you, right? Like, we're trying to stretch and go in a direction that accommodates some new ideas and keeps this train rolling forward. And so I think like for CAB, right? Like, and I think like it's important for us to really center with CAB, this is about catalyzing redevelopment in this area. And so I think that for me, if we were to send some sort of letter that is nodding in this direction, like I would want it to really strongly say, we need to keep this on track and we need to keep it rolling, right? And so to the degree that we can onboard and integrate ideas, we can and should. And I think also like incremental changes and moving in the right direction is the right direction. And part of what we're tasked with in the year ahead is street standards, right? And coming up with a vision for like what we want transportation in this area to look like, how we want it to function, where our car-free streets should be, right? And so I think that we need to have more of that vision in my mind to really like rally behind as a body and say like, this is what we want to see, right? And right now, it is what it is. The sequencing of that isn't syncing up great with where we need Second Street to go. And so that's, I think that we've struggled with this one, right? Because we love that vision. We love what's there. And yet, how do we move in that direction without pausing things that need to roll forth and onboard things as we can and have that integration? And I think we've struggled with that and we've talked about it a lot as a group. So I just want to kind of remind folks of where we've been and sort of, put that on the table as well. So, other thoughts or comments?
I'll just bring up there's 4 public comments or 4 public letters written in kind of opposition to bringing this to council in this way. And they're all business owners directly on Second Street. One is representative of the Business Association. I'm the president of to be open about that. Represents over 100 businesses. And why I asked that such a pointed question there is that it sounds nice, and I don't even disagree with any of this as the comedy of this, but if we start to whittle down and add new complexity to Second Street, we are going to slow up the process. There's no 2 ways about that. And I'm very connected, and hopefully Dale could weigh into how this might affect Brooks Resources and Taylor's developments. If you start to slow up the process, the commitments the city's already made to infrastructure improvements, what that might do to the business and development community in the future, and how it might give indications to the market to say they can't necessarily trust the city in what they're saying, what they're trying to do. So I'm very wary of slowing up this process in an idealistic format where we're bringing great ideas that will ultimately slow up the process. I mean, we're sitting here now 15 minutes, 25 minutes on this topic, and
Yeah.
it's slowing up this process. Imagine when we try to change a development code to meet some of these standards. So
Okay. And I do want to just acknowledge we're 5 minutes over. So sorry, Elizabeth,
No,
go
can-
ahead.
can I
And
just
then,
say one thing, if you have a potential financial benefit or detriment from what you're discussing, could you disclose a potential conflict?
I have a property on 821 Northeast 2nd Street, 205 Northeast Hawthorne Avenue. Would have direct impact to what we're discussing.
thank you. And Kathy, you had a comment, and then I didn't look over here, but are there hands over here as well?
Oh,
But
well,
yeah.
I guess I should just say, my employer owns property at 181 Franklin, which is on 2nd Street. I don't have any particular, preference for this cross section. I'd love to see the street get improved. And I'd rather have it be something that we all like, but at some point, some committee and city council decided they like that. And I hate to just kind of ad hoc decide, well, we like something better. It's kind of a bummer with the timing here that we haven't gone through our street standards and adopted something or recommended something new in advance of this. But I would like to see the street get built if there's some way we can retrofit with paint or things that aren't real expensive things to come back and do later. Then that'd be fantastic. Like the cross section that Keena had shown at the last meeting, with painted green bike lanes rather than sharrows. That seems like a pretty easy thing to do late in the process or after the fact, but.
Oh,
I
sorry.
was just gonna say that, that Ally did enumerate a number of things, like the raised parking and the raised intersections that are better than what we just saw from just the old section. So I think it sounds to me like some of the great ideas that have been put forward can be integrated without slowing down the project, and that would be great. I agree, we don't want to slow down the project. It's a tough one, because we'd love to have something different completely, but I don't think that's possible at this point, so I'm not sure what to recommend.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if folks want to make a motion, right, we can put it to a vote, right, of like make a motion that we want to send a letter and articulate to the best of your ability what you want in that recommendation. Based on this conversation, I think we have a little, we could staff is amazing, so they could probably strike a balance here, but
Yeah, and I wonder, I'm just curious if the recommendation could be open to a design alternative that isn't strictly according to the standard. And I think we should reiterate our desire to not delay the process. I hear loud and clear that from the business community that that needs to get done. It needs to get done as it's been planned. But humans are capable of amazing things. I mean, you get a design build contract, you get public consensus around a good idea that integrates well with a visionary overcrossing. To me, that doesn't sound impossible. And I would hope that we could recommend the highest and best vision, because this stuff is going to be there for a long time. And so that would be my preference, that we would kind of continue to support the highest vision and at the same time reiterate that we don't wish to delay the process. Is that overly idealistic? Perhaps, but honestly, I know that it's possible with the design build if we are flexible in our thinking and open to. The ideas were really good and they really integrate well. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. How do you actually make this work? How do you actually get a kid from big story books, over to the residential neighborhoods across the highway? And it was so refreshing to me to see that. And I think we can do it. I really think it's possible, but I heard you say that it absolutely without time, and I believe you. But I think we should ask and we should try. That it gets nimble when you've got a progressive design build. It's Borough and the consultant at that point, and I would like to. I don't know if maybe I can make a motion that we write some sort of
Lisa,
letter.
yeah.
I mean, in my mind, the letter would be almost exactly what Corey said, that it would be, we want this to move forward as quickly as possible, and we also want it to include as many ideas as possible to make it just not, to make it a lower stress, more mixed-use commercial street. Like, all of the ideas that Ally had up there are great. If we could integrate those in and have that be part of like what we're writing in the letter, then great, like that would be great.
And just to clarify, that's what the city's already doing, or that's what's up for discussion and decision by the council on Wednesday, or that's like.
That's what staff and the direction of the design team will be given. And they will go through a public open house and hear from the community and stakeholders that use that corridor and refine their design
Within
and
the constraints of what's in the code.
to allow for one-way travel as well and do future conversions. But again, like, do you wait until everything's perfect or do you kind of move forward? I'm
Yeah.
rambling now too, but
Sure.
maybe we just put it to a vote of whether
Yeah,
we
I
want
think
to.
that, so, yeah, so we.
Ask a rhetorical question.
Well, so I do want to be respectful of folks' time. We're almost 15 minutes over. So if there is a motion for a letter, I think that it should be made and it should be clear on if you're stipulating pushing in the direction of saying, do not move, move forward, do not pause it. To the extent possible, integrate these great ideas that the city is growing with and more if you can, or if you're saying, we want a design alternative, right? That looks more explicitly at all of the things, right? So I think the motion should provide clarity of like affirming shoring up, that kind of messaging, or if in fact it is this other thing that's desired.
I would propose a motion that that CAB makes a recommendation to review the design ideas presented by Ben Bikes and consider those in the design build of Second Street. And also keep the project schedule as planned. I would be willing to take a stab at writing that and for review by the chair. That's helpful, but would that an appropriate motion to?
It seems like, just rhetorically, we asked city staff if doing that will slow up the process if they actually integrate some of that. It seems like the answer was yes. And so if we're asking that while saying in a letter that we don't want the project to be delayed, it seems like we're talking against ourselves. And so I want to make sure that what we're saying we're clear about, because this wishy-washiness is exactly what the business community doesn't want. And it's exactly what chills the market. Because then we're unsure what we're doing. It goes to council and council gives staff 4 months to figure out what they're doing. And then this process gets pushed out a year and a half. And this is exactly what I'm worried about. I'm deeply worried about it. And it's not just because of the financial considerations I have.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was just gonna add, from my perspective, obviously I've been quiet. And I think the thing for me is like, we started this conversation with 2 minutes to go.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not prepared to make a vote. I understand the passion and I love the ideas, but I have no idea what actually we be putting forward. To Kurt's point is like, okay, well, yeah, we want this, but let's not muck it up. Like, I don't know how much we can continue to debate this or where I could get comfortable to vote to approve a motion. I guess want to throw that out there as I sit here quietly.
Thank you, Jeff. Do other folks feel the same? Yeah, at least.
Just one more concern is that we just heard that we're going to be far behind on our funding. And so if slowing down Second Street would then further slow funding and development and all that good stuff that we want in the area, that's concerning as well. So that's been on my mind of like, how could we speed things up faster to get everything moving in the fashion that we've been excited about and doing? And so, yeah, if there's going to be anything that we've been working on and excited about and have been decisive on, that would then slow all those things. I agree from what I've heard from talking to other business owners. It's been like, yeah, city's been talking about doing great things in the BCD for a long time. Still waiting. And so like 2 months ago, it's like, things are happening. It's so exciting. And then to think about it slowing down again is unfortunate, and I wouldn't want that to happen. But same thing, I do love all the ideas. I want my 10-year-old to be riding on all the streets in Bend. But So I agree. I would not allow my 10-year-old to ride on this road either, the way that it is. But I'm okay with that because there's other options. And anyway, so I feel the same way of like, I would love it to be perfect, all the beautiful things. But I'm really excited for it to just get started. And so I think knowing that there are adjustments that could be made in the future, I think some of the things that the streetscape elements that are listed are really good enhancements to what I just see visually, and does make it feel and look a lot different than any street in Bend right now. And so I think there's progress being made, and I'm happy with that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I think to land this, either make a motion or do not make a motion. I would say that there is not consensus in this body based on the comments that I've heard, but either you need to make a motion or not because we need to adjourn the meeting. So
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a motion would pass. I'll probably just write a comment to council.
Yeah, and I encourage all CAB members to participate in that design process. And like Ben Bike's comments will be heard and integrated into that design review process as well. That's why we hire a design team. We have public engagement for all of our capital projects. So that would be my direction.
Would it be possible to get after these open houses have happened or they're going on to have sort of a report to CAB to then
Yeah, we can keep
endorse
CAB
or
updated
comment
of the project delivery.
okay. All right. Apologies for running over today. We will go ahead and adjourn the CAB meeting for tonight. Thank you, everybody. It's